What activities that I do every day have an impact on my dopamine?
30 days of zero interaction with that substance, that person, etc.
What activities that I do every day have an impact on my dopamine?
Well, probably almost everything, in some ways. Every time we are doing something that's pleasurable, reinforcing, rewarding, that will affect dopamine. It's really the primary signal that lets us know that this thing is potentially important for our survival, as I mentioned. Even aversive stimuli can trigger dopamine.
What's aversive mean?
Something that's painful or not pleasurable, dopamine gets involved in that equation. Anything that's novel or new is something that triggers our dopamine in our reward pathway. Dopamine is fundamental for movement, so not just pleasure and reward, but also movement. So for example, Parkinson's disease, which is a disease related to stiffness and tremor, is caused by a depletion of dopamine in a part of the brain called the substantia nigra. And as dopamine gets depleted in that part of the brain, people lose the ability to move their bodies. And it's probably no coincidence that the same neurotransmitter that is so important for pleasure, reward, motivation is also really important for movement, because most organisms have to locomote toward the object of their desire. So we want that thing, we have to exert effort, right? We have to put in the work to go get it. But in the world today, we really don't have to do that, right? We can swipe right, we can swipe left, and all of a sudden it magically appears at the touch of a finger. And that's very confusing for our brains, because that's not how we evolved. We really evolved for having to do quite a bit of upfront work for a tiny little bit of reward.
I just want to, before we move on, talk about this point you said, because I think it's quite foundational to everything we're going to talk about dopamine being relative to pain.
Mm-hmm.
And I have this set of scales in front of me, and here I have some chemicals that are likely to produce dopamine in my brain, I believe, right?
Yes.
So alcohol.
Yes.
I have some rum, I have some whiskey, I have some vodka.
Mm-hmm.
And can you explain to me, using this rum, whiskey, and vodka, how dopamine is relative to pain and what's going on in my brain?
Sure.
Okay, I'll slide this over to you.
Oh, okay. So one of the most exciting findings in neuroscience in the past 75 years is that pleasure and pain are co-located in the brain. So the same parts of the brain that process pleasure also process pain. And in a very simple reductionist kind of way, they work like opposite sides of a balance. So imagine that deep in your brain's reward pathway, which is another exciting discovery, right? That there's this dedicated reward pathway of the brain that consists, broadly speaking, of the prefrontal cortex, which is this large gray matter area right behind our foreheads that's so important for future planning, for delayed gratification, for appreciating future consequences. You might think of it as like the brakes on the car, if we're going to analogize to an engine. And then deep, in the brain, we've got what we call the limbic areas, or the emotion brain. And there you have the nucleus accumbens and the ventral tegmental area that are rich in dopamine-releasing neurons, right? And they act like the accelerator on the car. So when you've got a healthy functioning brain, you've got enough accelerator, but not too much, right? So enough dopamine being released, but not too much. And you've got a healthy prefrontal cortex putting the brakes on that dopamine release.
Late at night, on occasion, I've eaten things that I really regret eating. Also, another one that I'm trying to work hard on is I can be very messy when I travel. So my hotel room can look like a mess. And I don't like that about myself. And I don't know why I do it, but it's almost like you talk about being unconscious. I'm clearly not thinking about it, but that's part of the problem. And it's the same with the bloody sugar at midnight. Ordering things that are, and then feeling instant guilt 10 seconds after I've put it in my mouth.
Well, it may be that on some level, you could actually be addicted to the guilt, not to the sugar. And so you return to the same emotional state that allows that action to reoccur. So if you said, let me decide how I am going to act, what I'm not going to do, and you rehearsed it. The research on mental rehearsal says your brain will look like you already did it. That you'll be so present, the brain won't know the difference between what you're imagining and what is real. The brain will begin to change to look like the experience has already happened. Now, you're priming your brain for that behavior. Keep rehearsing it.
Rehearsing it how? So give me.
Well,
So I play
mental rehearsal is one of these great ideas in neuroscience where you can actually install circuits in your brain, right? So everybody has done this. Musicians do it. They're playing a song in their mind all the time. Athletes do it. They're always going over their moves. Dancers do it. Actors do it. So many people rehearse mentally what they're about to do. And when they do that, they actually prime their brain. They actually can change their brain and change their body just by thought alone.
physiologically change it.
Physiologically change. You can take a group of people that never played the piano before and divide them into two different groups and do functional brain scans on both groups. One group, they'll come for 2 hours a day for 5 days, and they'll practice these one-handed scales and chords. Now, you learn something new, you make new connections in your brain. You get some instruction, you get your body involved. When you get your body involved, you're going to have an experience. You pay attention to what you're doing and you repeat it over and over again. Nerve cells that fire together, wire together. You're going to begin to install new circuits in the opposite side of your brain. That's common. You do the scan at the end, you see those actual physical changes. You take those people, the other group, and you ask them to close their eyes without lifting a finger. Have them mentally rehearse those scales and chords, and at the end of 5 days, they grow the same amount of circuits in their brain as the people who actually physically demonstrated the act. In other words, they were so present with what they were doing, the brain did not know the difference between the real-life experience and what they were imagining. The brain was physically changing to look like they already experienced it, they already did it. So now, you take those people, never played the piano before, they've just been mentally rehearsing for 2 hours a day for 5 days, you set them in front of a piano, and they could actually play those scales and chords. Why? Because they primed their brain for that behavior. So then if you're going to prime your brain for a new behavior, whether you're the CEO of a company, whether you're a parent, whether you're learning something, the more you rehearse it mentally, the more you prime your brain and body for the act. So you could actually practice rehearsing how you're going to change in your life. And if you keep doing it enough times, your behaviors will match your intentions automatically because you have the mind installed to do it. If you don't have the mind installed to do it, you'll go back to the same past behavior.
So along those lines, I've heard you say that in order to reset the dopamine system, essentially in order to break an addictive pattern, to become unaddicted, 30 days of zero interaction with that substance, that person, etc.
Right.
Is that correct?
Yeah. And 30 days is, in my clinical experience, the average amount of time it takes for the brain to reset reward pathways, for dopamine transmission to regenerate itself. There's also a little bit of science that suggests that that's true. Some imaging studies showing that our brains are still in a dopamine deficit state 2 weeks after we've been using our drug. And then a study by Schuckett and Brown, which took a group of depressed men who also were addicted to alcohol, put them in a hospital where they had received no treatment for depression, but they had no access to alcohol in that time. And after 4 weeks, 80% of them no longer met criteria for major depression. So again, this idea that by depriving ourselves of this high dopamine, high reward substance or behavior, we allow our brains to regenerate its own dopamine for the balance to really equilibrate. And then we're in a place where we can sort of enjoy other things.
So that progressive narrowing of what brings one pleasure eventually expands. So I'd like to dissect out that 30 days a little more finely. And I also want to address, how does one stop doing something for 30 days if the thing is a thought? So we'll kind of put that on the shelf for the moment. So days 1 through 10, I would imagine will be very uncomfortable.
Yes.
They're going to suck, basically, to be quite honest, because if the way you describe this pleasure pain balance, to my mind says that if you remove what little pleasure one is getting, or a lot of pleasure from engaging in some behavior, that's gone. The pain system is really ramped up and nothing is making me feel good. I'll just use myself as an example. I'm not in recovery, but that 10 days is going to be miserable.
Right.
Anxiety, trouble sleeping,
Yep.
Physical agitation, and to the point where, maybe impulsive, angry. Should one expect all of that? Should the family members of people expect all of that?
Yeah. So what I say to patients, and it's a really important piece of this intervention, is that you will feel worse before you feel better.
For how long?
Yeah.
This is probably the first question they ask, right?
And I say, usually in my clinical experience, you'll feel worse for 2 weeks. But if you can make it through those first 2 weeks, the sun will start to come out in week 3. And by week 4, most people are feeling a whole lot better than they were before they stopped using their substance. So, you have to, it's a hard thing. Like, you have to sign up for it. And I will say, obviously, there are people with addictions that are so severe that as long as they have access to their drug or behavior, they're not able to stop themselves. And that's why we have, higher levels of care or residential treatment. So this is not going to be for everybody, this intervention, but it's amazing how many people with really severe addictions to things like heroin, cocaine, very severe pornography addictions. I posit this, and I do it as an experiment. I said, let's try this experiment. I'm always amazed, number one, how many of them are willing, and number two, how many of them are actually able to do it. They are able to do it. And so that little nudge is sort of just what they need. And the carrot is, there's a better life out there for you, and you'll be able to taste it in a month. You really will be able to begin to see that you can feel better and that there's another way.